Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Mind Movers. Today we have a very good friend of mine, Jamie Clements. Jamie Clements, if you haven't heard of him, where have you been? Because he has owned the breathwork space. He is the CEO and founder of the Breath Space. He is somebody that integrates breathwork into daily life, daily practice, and also works with altered states of consciousness, creating a better life for people. I met Jamie on a retreat. I had one-on-one sessions with him as well. He also used Enlighten and loved it.
Excellent.
Jamie has really inspired me in my own practice, but thinking about breathwork and dentistry, which we're going to cover as well. But we're going to go off-piste today, and we're going to do a guided breathwork session together. So for anyone that hasn't tried this, I really encourage you to join in on us. Try not to breathe too heavily, Payman, because I don't know what he's going to be like with this. So Jamie's going to guide us through a couple of minutes of breath work, and then we're going to get into it.
Yeah, thank you, Rhona, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And as you said, I was actually on a podcast a couple of weeks ago where we did this, and it just changed the trajectory of the conversation. I sort of arrived to that recording a little bit frantic, a little bit hectic, going, I just need a moment to center. And we did literally 2 minutes of breath work, which was almost a perfect window into the power of this work as well, because it only takes, we're seeing more and more in the research now, a matter of 5 breaths, 10 breaths, 20 breaths to really create quite a profound shift in state. So for anybody listening, and for you guys here with me now, I just invite you to find a comfortable position sitting down. And then if you feel comfortable doing so, just gently closing the eyes. You can do this with your eyes open, but I'd encourage you to close down your eyes. So just take a moment to close your eyes here. Notice what you're feeling, notice how you're feeling, but most importantly here, notice how you're breathing. Is the breath fast or slow? Is it deep or is it shallow? Is it through the nose? Is it through the mouth? Just starting to tune in to your natural habitual breathing pattern. And we're just going to move through 2 very simple techniques that are designed to calm, balance, and downregulate the nervous system. The first is going to be a physiological sigh, which is going to be a deep inhale through the nose, followed by a second smaller inhale again through the nose, and then a sigh out of the mouth. Take 2 more like that, deeply in through the nose, and again, and sigh out. Once more, deeply in, and again, and sigh out. And then our second technique is going to be an extended exhale breath. When we make our exhale longer than our inhale, we lower the heart rate. We shift ourselves into this lovely parasympathetic rest and digest state. So this is just going to be, to your own count, a deep, gentle breath in through the nose, and then we're going to blow the exhale slowly and gently back out through the mouth, through pursed lips, like you're blowing through a small straw. So we'll take 5 of those in your own time, taking a nice, slow, steady breath in through the nose, and then blowing that exhale out softly and gently. Again, breathing in through the nose, and extending that breath out through the mouth. Good, and we'll take 3 more like that, deeply, slowly in, extending that breath out. Last 2, allow yourself to relax fully, deeply in, and softly extending that out breath, allowing the whole body to soften. Allow the shoulders to relax as we move into one final cycle of that breath. Extending that out breath, allowing that sense of calm, of relaxation to wash over your whole body here. And then just allow the breath to come back to gently flowing in and out of the nose. Take a moment just to pause to check in before you start to bring some small gentle movements back into the body. And whenever you're ready, you can blink, open your eyes.
So good.
Send everybody to sleep before the podcast starts.
I know, do you not?
Such a simple thing, right?
But I think it's Jamie. Like, I have to tell you, like, you know me, like, I know people that are top of their game who just said to me in the kitchen if anyone was average, would you be friends with them? I was like, Payman, that's not true, because he's so impressed with the people. I would. Listen, I hang out with winners. No, I'm joking.
Hey, look, there's, I always say, we have different people in our lives for different reasons, but there is certainly something to the company you keep and where that takes you in your life.
Yeah.
I don't think, I actually heard an amazing thing yesterday that was saying, we often hear it's, your life, it's the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And the person was actually saying, it's not quite that, it's that you sink to the standards of the lowest common denominator of the people you spend the most time with. And so that's where, and this is where the nervous system, I don't want to dive in too deep too early, but our nervous systems are constantly in dialogue, and the people that regulate you, the people that elevate you, they'll be working with your nervous system in a certain way, and the people that keep you stuck, keep you limited, keep you dysregulated will also have a set way in their nervous system that they're working with. So there's method to the madness and method to the company that we keep, for sure.
So have you fired friends?
Have I fired friends? I would say friendships have developed. Some have come, some have gone. I would say the friends that I've made in the last 5 years are different, not for better or for worse, than the friends that I made previously. I think there are friends that come from a place of longevity, from having known me for a long time, who I'm still close with, but perhaps in a slightly different way to how we were previously. And then I think there are people that I've met in the last few years where I have been more open in myself and more regulated in myself, who mirror that. So yeah, I think it's never been about cutting people out, but certainly watching how I've developed and how the relationships have developed within that, I think.
There's a really amazing podcaster, I'm sure you guys have seen her. She's Middle Eastern, and she's got like tattoos and a hat, and she's like an amazing motivational speaker. She actually works in tech. And she basically, a video that she did went viral because she basically said, people have come and gone, but when people have got rid of themselves, it feels so good because it's like a detox. And she said, your brain is like tofu. Be careful what you marinate it in, And, I love that.
Have you fired friends?
I find it really difficult. I think over time I've naturally drifted from people because they've not served the purpose in my life. But I think London is a very complex place because I'm constantly living in dichotomy, because the identity that I have built within London means that I naturally attract a certain type of person or clientele, which doesn't necessarily align with my true authentic self. I've been lucky enough that when I spent time with Jamie, I'm actually my true authentic self. We've met on retreats. And that space is when I'm my most vulnerable and when I feel my safest, because the people around me feel safe, where I would argue that some of the people in London, not for bad reasons, I'm more in survival mode more than, being at my most relaxed state. Jamie, let's talk a little about your journey. So we always like to start from the beginning. I know that when I met you, I was really surprised to hear that you worked in tech. Tech is one of these jobs that's super glamorized. It is, the sort of new city banking job as it was like in the 90s and 80s. Everyone wants to be in tech. It's the place to be. But you told me it made you really miserable, affected your mental health, and then led you to breathwork. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always kind of at this point when I speak about my story say that I had a relatively by the book kind of upbringing, middle class, very fortunate to not have had too many challenges financially from that perspective growing up, and I'm very grateful for that. But around the age of 15, I was 15, my parents got divorced, and I don't put blame on them for that, because everyone needs to do what they need to do to move on with their lives. But it definitely, at that point in my life that was so formative, did have a significant impact on me. And through my late teens, around that time, and through my early 20s, I definitely went inwards. I definitely withdrew. I definitely lost elements of myself. There was an anxiety really that took hold, and a level of unease that took hold. I really, unknowingly, because I had friends, I was high functioning, I was achieving at school, I was playing very high level of sport at that time as well. I was functioning, but under the surface, I think I was very uneasy and very unhappy. And that went on then into my early 20s through university. And then at around the age of 24, I was in a very kind of bleak place. I suffered with anxiety throughout that whole sort of 10-year period, and depression as a result of that anxiety. And a lot of that, I think, stemmed from a place of post my parents' divorce, feeling like I needed to fit in, to be accepted, ultimately above that to be loved and to be kind of desired in a way. And so I went down a path that I thought would get me that. So it wasn't necessarily, you talked about authenticity, and I always come back to that now in my life today. How can I show up as my most authentic self, and what environments empower that? But through that period in my late teens, early 20s, I was studying a subject that I thought would get me the job, that I thought would get me the money, that I thought would get me the approval. So I studied economics. I went to a very good university, got a degree, thought I wanted to work in finance, did internships in investment banking. Hated it. Knew it wasn't me right from the get-go. And so I sort of, at that point as well, I felt very uneducated, not from a academic perspective, but from a perspective of knowing what was out there. I didn't know enough about the world. I had a very narrow view, simply because of where I'd grown up, what I'd done up until that point, and what everyone else was doing around me. And so I was like, I'm going to, take a slightly different path that was so undramatically different. I went and worked in fintech. I worked in financial technology instead of finance, and thought I was doing something really out there and outlandish, and how rogue of me to go and work in tech startups instead of an investment bank. And I had some jobs that I really loved, genuinely, and I don't actually look back and think that there was anything wrong with the work itself.
Sure.
It just wasn't me. And I was so lost, and I was continuously losing myself trying to find myself through fitting in. And then at the age of 24, hit a particular rock bottom, was suffering and struggling with suicidal ideation, with deep depression, and panic attacks that were debilitating on a near daily basis. And that led me to get help. Now, breathwork was a part of that, and a very, very big part of that. But that was made up of a number of things: therapy, meditation, yoga, exercise came back into my life in a major way. But breathwork for me was the linchpin. It was the key that unlocked a lot of things for me, particularly with my anxiety. I think that I put a huge amount of weighting on breathwork as a part of that process, and continues to be something that supports me to this day.
Who introduced you to the breathwork?
A friend of mine called Christian, who is now actually a business partner of mine in a different business.
Oh, wow. Not Engelmeyer.
No,
I wish.
Life would be very different if he were a friend of mine. So Christian is the founder of a business called The Move Method. We've got a studio over in Fulham, and he had a former studio, and I was a member of this studio. And he had a fairly similar background to me. He was a professional rugby player, and we've always had quite a lot in common. And I was training at the studio, I was practicing at the studio, and he sort of just nudged me in the direction of breathwork, and I was resistant, I was reluctant, I was hesitant. I wasn't open to it. I wasn't open to much beyond a bit of talk therapy and a bit of exercise, maybe a bit of yoga. It just seemed too out there for me. I was too skeptical.
Sure.
And it was sort of a gentle nudge in that direction, and then eventually I kind of bit the bullet and decided to see what it was all about, and haven't really looked back since.
Amazing. That's so amazing. And so tell us then how you made the leap. So from this kind of very corporate job into then becoming the CEO, founder of the breast space. Like, how did you make that leap and that transition?
On reflection, I can't remember my life being any different. And I don't actually remember at any point feeling like I was making a big leap. It almost felt like it was a pull. Like I cannot see my life having played out any other way, to be totally honest with you. So I was working at a digital transformation consultancy at the time for the financial services, ticking along. I was coasting. And I started training in breathwork. This was about 6 years ago, sort of 5 years ago now. And I'd spent a couple of years exploring breathwork, everything that it had to offer, and really finding my way with it in my personal practice. And I had one particular transformative experience with breathwork that I left just going, I want to see how I might be able to share this with other people. And that was where it began, was just a desire to gift what I'd received from it as a practice to other people. And so I started training, I started immersing myself in it. I've always had a fascination with human nature and psychology. And so I started piecing together, I was like, oh, this is actually where I should have been all along, actually, in terms of learning, in terms of education, in terms of what I was looking to get from my life, from quite a natural, authentic place. It all started to make a lot more sense. And so started training, started doing certifications, qualifications, and started the business at the beginning of end of 2019, start of 2020. And obviously we were about to dip into COVID at that point, and I was still working full time. And so I was running the two alongside each other and really taking quite a lot of what I'd learned from small startup businesses, entrepreneurial people,
amazing.
to actually go, is there a business here? Is there actually something here that could, not even necessarily at that point I was particularly concerned about making a life for myself from it, but is there actually, does this have legs? Can I actually turn what feels right now like a passion and a passion project into something a little bit more serious, something a little bit more legitimate? And that really was the beginning. And then I left my last full-time job at the beginning of 2021. So I spent about a year and a half building the business alongside what I was doing full-time through COVID, and then left the last full-time job in the beginning of 2021 and went out to kind of continue building the breath space and make it what it is today.
Amazing.
What was the business model?
Yeah.
Varied and developing, I would say. So I think this year has been particularly interesting for me because I felt a real pull and a real desire to build the brand as a brand in of itself, whereas the 3-4 years prior that I'd been very much building Jamie Clements, breathwork coach, individual. And actually in the last 6 months, it's become very apparent that this is here to be more than that. And actually for me, in terms of what I know I want for my life longer term, I have no interest in always being the face of it by any means.
That's the goal.
I'm an introvert. I love working with people. I love teaching and educating, but I need days to recoup and recover afterwards. So for me, this is actually about becoming almost a mouthpiece for breathwork and sharing that work in whatever form that takes. The business model at the moment is pretty much a split down the middle of in-person and online. So I work privately one-to-one. I work with businesses and corporates. I work with high-profile individuals, particularly from a private practice perspective, and then also group workshops, retreats, and that side of things from an in-person point of view. I then have online courses, online membership, a real digital presence. I work with apps, and then increasingly I'm finding myself working in a consultancy kind of capacity, working with different businesses to help them integrate well-being and breathwork into what they do. So hotels being a great example, all looking to kind of ride this wave of hospitality and wellness merging. So spending a lot of time actually sharing how and what they should be doing when it comes to integrating breathwork as well. So it's sort of started very broad and it's gradually getting a little bit narrower. And this year is very much about building the brand as a brand and the business scaling ultimately.
Jamie, for those people that don't know, can you explain in layman's term what breathwork actually is? Because people will be like, is it just me huffing and puffing? What's the science behind it? And is there a particular method that you have created for yourself?
For sure. So it's the question, because I think, these conversations, there's a pre-existing level of knowledge that lulls me into a false sense of feeling like everybody knows what I'm going on about.
Same with dentistry. People are like talking about stuff and they're like, yeah, veneers. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, exactly. So breathwork for me, is an umbrella term that encapsulates any way that we can use the breath to shift our state physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Within that, the way that I've developed the breath space approach over the last few years has very much been informed both by ancient practices, ancient wisdom, and contemporary science-backed evidence-based practices, and has been drawn directly from how I benefited from breathwork. So I talk about full spectrum breathwork, really working from at one end the micro, which is about how we breathe day to day, and the 20,000+ breaths that we take every single day, and the impact of those, and how we can work at a very simple level to optimize that, all the way through to the macro level where we're working with big transformational breathwork experiences. And there's 3 key pillars that we can break it down to. The first being that functional breathing piece. So how, as a listener, as you guys hear right now, do you breathe unconsciously? What is the natural resting state of your breath? And is that helping you? Is that harming you? How is that affecting you? And once we can become aware of that, how can you optimize that? So that for me is really it can be a spectrum or a bit of a pyramid, and that is the first layer. That is the fundamentals. We then have this middle piece, which is around the nervous system and nervous system regulation, which is looking at the role of the quite unique role of the breath as a part of our autonomic nervous system. And the best analogy here is that your breath can act as a remote control into the state of your nervous system to create change by conscious breathing. We then have the far end of the spectrum, which is where we're working with therapeutic breathwork, conscious connected breathing, these big transcendent mystical experiences that come as a result of using the breath to tap into altered states of consciousness. That realm sounds sexier, it sounds more exciting, and ultimately on the face of it, it is, but all of these are incredibly impactful and important. This kind of deeper end of the spectrum has typically been, I'd say, neglected or not really viewed as worth researching by the scientific community. But there are studies emerging now, and there's a really exciting one that came out back in September last year that found, through anecdotal experience, but through the research of this study group, that you can create mystical experiences that are comparable to medium to high doses of psilocybin.
Have you heard about this?
Breathwork. So that to me is the most exciting piece of research in breathwork for a while.
So, this is super interesting to me as well, because I've heard people say, particularly addicts, because addicts feel like they can't, even though plant medicine is obviously not considered to necessarily be a form of addiction, like a lot of people that go into total sobriety definitely don't even want to do plant medicines, but they say they can achieve that same high through breath work. Like you literally can reach an altered state of consciousness, you see visuals, like experience that in your body, and I find that incredible. To me though, I'm a bit of a disbeliever. I'm like, how? Do you know what I mean? Like, do you have to be there for hours? And I'd probably lose patience, and with my ADHD tendencies, I just can't imagine like reaching that altered state. So, what would be required, and do you need to be a pro to reach that?
I'd say not. It's not about being a pro, and it's not even necessarily about time. I think the big difference, the key differential between plant medicine, psychedelics, and breathwork is the substance nature of the medicine work. Because when you take a plant medicine, a psychedelic, you are on the roller coaster. You're not getting off. There is a change coming. There's an experience coming, and you ultimately just have to surrender to that. And if you try and control that, it can create discomfort. With breathwork, and this is a pro and a con, when it comes to working with altered states of consciousness, you are in control. So you can stop, you can get distracted, you can get resistant, you can pull back, you can push forward. That to me is the beauty of it and the pitfall of it, because it can be so powerful. And I wouldn't ever want to be one of those people that says it can work for everyone, but it can work for a large majority of people if we're taking into account the proper medical contraindications, safety precautions, and all of that side of things. The difference in what I see, over the past sort of 4.5, 5 years of experience in retreats and in workshops where we're working with these deeper modalities, is that someone might step in, you might step in, for example, Rhona, and it might take you 40 minutes in a session to really get into it. For someone else, it might be their first session ever, and it might take them 5 minutes and they're in. And that is dependent on a number of factors, but very much about the individual, your capacity to let go, your natural brain state as well, because ultimately we are working with brain states and shifting brain states, and really at a kind of slightly reductionist level, we're dropping the activity in the monkey mind, that kind of ruminative part of the brain, and seeing a spike in activity in the subconscious, which is where the experience itself comes from, which is completely mirroring what we see with plant medicines. So sometimes it takes people, and I was one of these people, it took me probably 5 or 6 sessions to get anywhere, because I view it as sort of layers of the onion. I had a lot of stuff to dig through to even get to a point where I could open to an experience, whereas other people will drop straight in, and that is just unique to the individual. So I'd say there's a capacity for the large majority of people to get genuine experience and benefit from that particular style of breath work, but I'm also aware that it's not for everybody. So
is there a particular habit, I mean, coffee or sleep, or is there something that gets in the way? Did you tell people not to drink coffee before they have a session or something?
So I'd say I ran a retreat this weekend just gone, and we advise in the week leading up to it to minimize coffee, minimize social media use, minimize stress, clean up your diet, all of this stuff that you might do for a dieter working with plant medicines as well. I wouldn't say it's a particular habit, but I would say it's anything that serves as an overstimulating capacity on both the body and the mind. So anything that could be a distraction, anything that might stop you going inwards, anything that keeps you trapped in your head. And so there will be certain personalities who have a trickier time of being trapped in their head anyway, whereas other people who might actually just be able to drop in much more naturally and more quickly. So in an ideal world, we would strip out kind of stimulants, we'd strip out tech, we'd strip out everything, which is kind of just a bit of a metaphor for life on a grander scale ultimately. But to get the most from it, we would look to minimize other aspects.
I'm going to pivot a little bit because obviously we're dentists and I'm so interested in this. So recently on social media platforms like TikTok and everyone's been talking about breath work, jaw formation, and I think we've seen a massive change in dentistry because we used to be perceived as butchers and very much like drill, fill, pay the bill sort of people. Now people are recognizing, I mean, it's so exciting. I was just saying to you earlier, Huberman's released a podcast on the oral microbiome. Amazing. So we're having these conversations, and controversially, there was an orthodontist, him and his father mew, and it's mewing, I learned this on TikTok. And I asked my orthodontist and she was just like, this is super controversial, but ultimately environmental and genetic factors can play an effect on the growth of the child and their jaw, etc. And then obviously breathing as well. So I want you, and you're like, Rhona, you should know more about this. I actually don't, and I don't know if Payman does. Do you know about how breath and the jaw affects?
Well, I had a boss who was very close to Mew. And so he used to talk a lot about it. But
so tell us, Jamie.
It's one of the big ones at the moment because of the rise of social media and the chat about mouth taping.
Yeah.
So ultimately, this fits into this first pillar where we're talking about functional breathing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the conversation about functional breathing is, broadly speaking, split into a conversation versus nasal versus mouth. And belly versus chest. So this is about biomechanics and biochemistry of breathing and how you really habitually breathe naturally. And it's fascinating because if we just speak to what we're referring to here in terms of nasal breathing versus mouth breathing, oral breathing, the benefits of nasal breathing over mouth breathing are so well documented now in the research. There's not even a discussion anymore around this. And this applies to at rest, during sleep, during low to medium intensity exercise. We want to be breathing through the nose. So the nose will naturally slow the breath. It's a smaller passageway. It's going to regulate the breath in a really nice way that's going to help to regulate the nervous system. Number one, it's going to filter, humidify, and really create optimal air to be received by the lungs. Additionally to that, when we breathe through the nose, we get deeper and better recruitment of the bottom portion of the lungs. So we're using more of our respiratory capacity. All of these are great. Mouth breathing, on the other hand, not only recruits a higher portion of the lungs, so we're actually breathing more shallow. We're also breathing more in terms of volume, so we're over breathing, what people talk about in terms of things like hyperventilation syndrome. So we're offloading a lot of carbon dioxide. We might then get decrease in cerebral blood flow, brain fog, dehydration. There's one amazing study that shows that mouth breathing, we lose 42% more water, mouth breathing compared to nasal breathing, which is
how interesting.
Plenty. And the reason that this comes around to this idea of mouth taping and mouth breathing and looking to avoid it, particularly during sleep, is that mouth taping is quite people view it as strange, people view it as out there, people view it as shocking, but also because of the fact that so many people are falling into habitual mouth breathing while they're awake and while they're asleep. So the people I'm talking to are the ones that wake up, dry mouth, brain fog, fatigue, muscle soreness.
Interesting.
And to come back to your point on dentistry.
But hang on, so mouth taping does work in conclusion.
Maybe just go through what it is.
Yeah.
Right?
I would simplify it. So mouth taping, very simply.
Have you not seen it?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Typically advised to be a little strip of tape vertically over the center of your lips. The idea being that it's gently keeping the mouth closed while you sleep.
Yeah.
The reason for this is that I can say, right, if you're a habitual mouth breather while you're awake, I want you to focus while you're awake on breathing more through your nose. And you go, okay, great, I'll do that. You go to sleep and you spend 8 hours breathing with an open mouth, snoring, whatever it might be, then you're undoing a lot of that hard work, and you're not really resolving the root cause issue. And there can be multiple root causes of mouth breathing. So the mouth taping just really helps to redirect the breath back through the nose during sleep. It is, in my opinion, a temporary fix. It's a short-term solution that can help us create those conditions where we can move towards a more optimal, more functional breathing pattern. It is also not safe for people with certain medical contraindications around cardiovascular system, with severe sleep apnea, particularly obstructive sleep apnea. It's not advised, even though those people would probably also be mouth breathing. And anybody who's pregnant. So there's like quick caveats and disclaimers around it. But I'd say for fit, healthy individuals who mouth breathe, who are aware either because their partners told them or because they're waking up with a lot of these symptoms of dry mouth, brain fog, fatigue, bad breath, then it's highly likely that you're mouth breathing, and that mouth taping could be a short-term solution to that. So I would say it works. I've done it myself. I don't do it as much as I did previously because I have developed over the years kind of an all-round more healthy breathing pattern that has fed into sleep. And I can certainly attest to the fact that especially in the first 6 months of doing it and getting traction with it, I noticed such a significant shift because I had been struggling with sinus issues. I'd been breathing through my mouth for a lot of my early 20s, that actually it's the lowest hanging fruit that I've found from a health perspective, from a very personal experience perspective as well, in terms of clarity of thought, sleep quality, overall cognitive functioning on waking. And it's quite it comes out being quite controversial, but that's social media's fault because
people are like so alarmed to see your like mouth tape shop. But so with jaw formation, because obviously we've got a condition called an anterior open bite, which basically means that the top and bottom teeth don't meet. You've got this gap between your top and bottom teeth, and sometimes people try to close that space with their tongues. They get something called an endogenous tongue thrust to create like a seal, for example. And definitely, typically we call them mouth breathers, and there's other kind of like issues going on with them. So do you believe that something and I know you're not like the dentist or anything like that, but do you think that there is scope for a conversation where interceptive treatment can be done to help jaw development? Let's talk about jaw development.
For sure. So from a mouth breathing perspective, we see particularly and this conversation, I think, across dentistry and the world of respiratory physiology is great, because we typically see, especially in childhood and development, kind of craniofacial development, mouth breathing will lead to a elongation of the face, a longer face, and a setting back of the lower
mandible,
mandible. So you see poor teeth formation. You see a lot of factors that come up as a result of that, alongside the other symptoms that we've mentioned in terms of cognitive function and sort of mental and emotional side of it. I think it's multifaceted because, you talked about environmental. It's definitely a case for things like diet and proper kind of food and real whole food in terms of how often we're chewing and that formation of the jaw. But again, it's all of these things are multifaceted. And because of that, we can suggest that breath and mouth breathing is a likely factor. And if you see your child, for example, or a young adult, or even an older adult who is mouth breathing, and they are having issues with kind of jaw formation, face shape, general respiratory health as well, then as long as they are fit and healthy, that you've actually not got much to lose in trying to remedy that as a possible solution, would be my opinion.
But how can you remedy it? Do you know what I mean? Like, so if a child is mouth breathing, what are you going to do? You're going to tape their mouth shut then from a young age? Would you do it? I don't have kids yet, so I don't know.
No.
There's
it's invasive.
It's invasive.
It feels weird.
Yeah.
For a kid.
There's certain tape that goes around the edge of the mouth that gently keeps the lips closed, and that is what's typically recommended and suggested for children. My partner has a daughter. We've had this conversation about it in terms of like, could we actually address it if we felt it was an issue? And I feel quite strongly on it because I am clearly in this world, and I see the harm that continuous habitual mouth breathing can do. And as with anything in life, nature or nurture, the earlier you catch it, the better. And the longer it goes on for, the worse it becomes, but also the harder it is to undo. And so while it is invasive and probably not easy to any parents listening or watching, they'll be going, yeah, fat chance of that happening. I'm never going to get my kid to do that. And maybe that's the case, but what else can we be doing? And I think there's a conversation here about wake time breathing and actually looking at someone isn't just mouth breathing just because. They're not just mouth breathing at night because. So what can we actually look at?
It seems like a cultural problem rather than an actual problem.
Well,
if there was some device that a dentist could make that you could put inside the mouth rather than the fact that it's right over the lips just feels so strange, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's lots of there's brands out there now like MyoBrace and stuff that are really affecting like the jaw formation, etc. And a bit teetering off from like breath work. Now they're showing as well that giving your child like really chewy foods is really good for jaw development and everything like that. What I'm also interested to know is there any correlation between the types of breathing and mental health disorders? So like ADHD, like I've heard that ADHD now is linked to things going on in the mouth and breathing, etc., like that, which again is a massive thing for the dental sphere. So has there been shown?
Yeah, so it's a little bit chicken and egg when it comes to the mental and emotional experience and the experience of the breath. So the nervous system and breath are in this continuous dialogue where it's, as we all know, if something frightens you, your breath will speed up, you'll feel more fear, you'll feel anxious, and vice versa. If you're breathing really quickly, you'll start to feel more anxious. So we're in this sort of constant loop. There was a great study that came out in 2013 that looked at the natural habitual breathing pattern of a study group that had diagnosed anxiety disorders, so significant enough anxiety disorders to be given a diagnosis. And they found, I think the stat was 72% of those with anxiety disorders also had what were deemed diagnosable dysfunctional breathing patterns. And that really, to me, whether it's causation, whether it's correlation, whatever the starting point, you develop an anxiety disorder and develop dysfunctional breathing, they perpetuate each other. So we have this intrinsic link between the state of breath and the state of mind. And ADHD is a great example because obviously we're seeing so much at the moment, a conversation around ADHD, adult diagnoses of ADHD.
Yeah.
And I certainly feel from my own perspective when I catch myself in what I would deem sort of as ADHD-like behaviors, a lack of focus, overstimulation, hyperfocus, whatever it might be. And when I work with people with ADHD, what we're ultimately looking at isn't saying that breath can cure ADHD, but we can certainly use breath work to work with symptoms, to support ourselves. So a lot of people struggling with ADHD are also going to be feeling some expression of a dysregulated, overstimulated nervous system. So actually, while we might not be working with the root cause of the ADHD itself, perhaps we might be with some people, we can use certain tools, techniques, practices to help them feel more balanced, to focus more, to feel more regulated, whatever it might be. And so for me, this is where stuff gets really powerful for breathwork from a day-to-day level. There's actually we can work with our state of mind directly through the breath. And that to me is the power of it.
It's super interesting because, the autonomic nervous system, by definition, is autonomic. Whereas some of the stuff I've seen with Wim Hof, you can literally, it's the only way of tapping into your autonomic nervous system is by changing your breath. Tell me, what are a couple of useful breathing patterns? Let's say I'm super stressed and about to have a panic attack or feel that coming on. What should I do? And the opposite, let's say I'm low energy and I want to get going. What should I do?
Great question. Yeah, so this comes back to the autonomic system, right? We're using that lever, that remote control.
Yeah.
So the language that we use here is up regulation, which is that lifting, or down regulation, which is the calming, which is the sympathetic response, which is fight, flight, freeze, and the parasympathetic rest and digest. For panic and high anxiety and just general stress, most of the techniques and the stuff we lean on is pretty straightforward, but tends to lean towards an extended exhale. So like we did right back at the beginning, we did 5 extended exhale breaths. This comes back to heart rate and heart rate variability. So we often think if my resting heart rate, for example, might be 60 beats per minute. We think a beat on the second, every second for a minute. But what's actually happening is when we inhale, because of the change in volume of the thoracic cavity, our heart rate slightly speeds up. When we exhale, it slightly slows down. Logic, maths, whatever we want to call it, if you make your exhale longer than your inhale, your heart rate is going to spend more time slowing down. You're going to start to feel more calm. We're really tapping into that parasympathetic response. So for high anxiety, usually we'll work with some kind of 1-to-2 ratio of inhale to exhale. So in for 3, out for 6, in for 4, out for 8, really maximizing the length of that exhale. We also introduce short holds. So in for 4, hold 4, out for 8 is a great one. And the reason for that, and from my past with panic attacks, one of the most frustrating, well-intended, but frustrating pieces of advice is slow down your breathing, because you're in a panic attack and you barely have any control of your breathing. And so one of the most powerful things that I found was actually to be able to take a quick hold, because then my breathing isn't out of control. I hold, I start breathing a little bit more slowly, I hold, and it's really just taking back a little bit of control, a bit of autonomy over my system and over what's going on.
I found the hold really useful last night when I did your
yes
thing. It was almost like
you literally went from movement is medicine to breath work.
Yeah,
I love you. I'm so proud of you.
I did it one after the other.
So proud of you.
But it was the hold was almost like a stillness, like a.
But listen, I'm going to be honest with you, and I don't know if this is me being me, but I just can't do breath work on my own, and that's why, like, I literally,
I like the guiding.
Yeah, exactly. It's Jamie's guidance, and that's why I think, like, I always say, like, always invest in the professionals, because I think, like, yeah, sure, I can download Headspace, which I have done. I've done this stuff, but like when you I've had one sessions with Jamie, gone to his house, and it's just a different space.
Look, it's the difference between watching a personal trainer on a video,
and
actually being there, and I think part of it is the accountability of it, you know, actually turning up. Yeah. I found float tank the best.
What's that?
Float tank.
Oh, I've heard about this. I've never been, guys. Where is it?
In Wandsworth, I go.
So far, why?
It's near me, so Fulham.
There's one in. They're all over the place now.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, they're great.
So what is it? You in water?
Yeah, salty water at body temperature and a cover, but basically there's no sort of stimulus at all.
But hold on, are you just on top of the water?
You're floating, because
in like a bikini or whatever.
Yeah, well, naked because it's covered.
Oh, really?
And then, but then the breathing's the only thing. And I found when I want
to try this
for an hour, you're just breathing, and it's the only time where you can really super focus in on breathing. 'Cause you're never going to do it for an hour like this, and there's bright lights and all that. Have you tried it?
Yeah, I love it. I've not done it for a while, and I'm going to go back. It's great. It's sensory deprivation, and it is, I'd say, akin to a lot of breathwork experience as well at that deeper end. Spend maybe the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes going, I'm a bit bored, I'm a bit restless.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
If you can get into it, if you can stay with your breath, it becomes this amazing space.
So I want to ask you, I mean, Jamie, I've known you for a long time now, and I know that, you know, nothing sort of phases you in this realm, but Jamie's done some incredible work with other men, creating safe spaces for men, which is also one of the big reasons why I wanted to bring him here. We often talk about, I talk a lot about men actually on this podcast, only because I feel like, you know, male suicide is still the single biggest killer in the UK of men under 25. And I still feel worried for the role models that are out there. And Jamie's created a space with men that are, you know, look like, I want to say normal people, because I think people associate safe spaces with like being a bit woo-woo and a bit like, as they would say, naff. I'm just like kind of quoting. But he's created like these like men's circles. They do like retreats together, and they do activities which like harnesses a lot of you know, I say community and like a tribe like spirit. But was it ever difficult for you to create those spaces, and like in terms of like delving into the world of breath space, which would be considered quite like a feminine thing to do? Was there anything around that was difficult for your mental health?
Absolutely. I'd say it's still a piece of work for me in terms of the development of my comfort in those spaces. I grew up from 15 with my mum and my sister, and didn't spend it. I spent time with my dad. I still have a good relationship with my dad, but I definitely grew up in the learnings and the environment of my mum and my sister, and I put down a lot of my success and my kind of fulfillment to that, and the skills that I actually learned there, and kind of everything that I absorbed. And I've typically struggled, not so much in the last few years as I've worked with it and through it, but typically struggle with my relationship towards other men. I think there's a naturally confrontational, combative element to not all men, but the male group. And that leads to a lack of vulnerability, a lack of openness. And in the same way, it's either a vicious or a virtuous cycle. Someone being open and vulnerable promotes openness and vulnerability, and someone being closed off and a bit aloof feeds the same.
Yeah.
It feeds standoffishness, and that is never going to be a healthy place for connection, because the connection comes through the openness, through the authenticity, through the vulnerability. And so I've been really fortunate to have worked with more and more men. I'd say it's still heavily weighted towards women, absolutely. I think the nature of the work that I do, I don't shy away from leading with emotion in my work, and it takes time for people en masse to come into that with comfort, but particularly men. So many of us, myself included, were raised of an era, and to this day, of a conditioning that told us that expression, healthy expression of emotion, any expression of emotion was feminine. It was weak. It was something not to be engaged with, and so we push it down, and then we suffer. And so I've been incredibly grateful that it's developed over the last few years. I've sat in and held men's circles, men's spaces, and I'm a big advocate now in my work of mixed spaces and the capacity for co-healing of women to witness men in their vulnerability and their openness, and to for the women who have maybe had terrible traumatic experiences at the hands of men, to witness men who are not threatening in that way, who are open, who are healing, who are trying, and vice versa. I know so many men who have suffered at the hands of women, emotionally, physically, and for people to see a part of, maybe it's your mum, maybe it's your dad, maybe it's an ex-partner, to see a glimpse of that person who has hurt you in someone else in one of those spaces is incredibly healing, because there's forgiveness, there is compassion, there is conversation, and all of this healing for me in that capacity comes down to, can you allow yourself to understand another perspective, someone else's perspective? Can you put yourself in the shoes of the person that hurt you? I think about my parents' divorce and my dad, clearly, and this is something, that I've worked with and worked through, clearly everything that had happened before in his life, in his childhood, had led to a point where he found himself unable to communicate in a way that made that process perhaps easier than it could have been. But as a late teens, early 20s man, I held a lot of resentment towards him and very little understanding. And it's only been through the understanding that you can even start to tap into forgiveness and compassion. And I think a lot of men struggle with that. I think just the openness piece, the emotional vulnerability piece, a lot of good has happened. There's so much more conversation happening than there's ever been before, but there's still work to be done, I think.
100%. I want to ask you something. Have you ever cried in front of your friends?
Sure.
You have?
Yeah.
Proud of you. I didn't expect that off you, actually.
Why?
I don't know. I just feel like it's like old school generation as well, of like, men have to always be like stoic and strong and etc. The thing is that I think that it is important. I mean, it was interesting because when we were talking on another podcast, I was talking about my immigrant family and the different complexities that came with that, and Payman was like resonating, and how what we achieved academically or our achievements made us feel a sense of self-worth. And then someone commented on the podcast and they were like, yeah, but what's the opposite to that? Like, I think that there has to be a balance, because if we tell people to just cry it out and like dwell on their like sadness, they don't grow and become resilient. I thought that was quite an interesting point, because I'm like, is there a balance? Do you think that we have become too soft as a nation and we're allowing people to use their struggles to kind of get on with it? Or do you think it is important that we actually create safer spaces,
I think it's a great question. I think my view is that we have too much comfort, not that we have too much openness and softness. I think we're soft from a place of complacency and comfort rather than soft from a place of vulnerability. I actually think there's an interesting piece in the self-development conversation that I think sometimes gets missed, which is actually the goal here isn't trauma dumping, constant openness, constant just shedding everything with everyone and crying without any, we take crying as an obvious example, but expressing without any thought. It's emotional regulation that we're seeking. And we often confuse, Stoicism is a great example of something that's been massively misunderstood in modern society, because Stoicism, people are like, that's just emotional repression in a different language. But actually Stoicism, the Stoics were the best at regulating their emotions. They were able to experience deep suffering, deep struggle, feel it all, and move forward. And actually that to me is where the growth and the resilience comes from. Isn't from blocking an expression of an emotion, blocking the feeling of a feeling. It's actually feeling it fully, allowing it to pass through you, and then regulating yourself in the face of it. And I think that's something that, especially in the conversation around men's mental health, has to come into this, because I think that's why a lot of men are resistant and reluctant towards it, because they just think, I'm just going to become soft, I'm going to become too open, too vulnerable, it's going to be used against me, when actually this is about learn how to feel your feelings so that you can become the best version of yourself, so that you can be strong, so that you can support other people, because you cannot support anybody else in their emotions effectively if you're completely disconnected from your own.
And it will manifest in other physical ways. And that's why when you see people that are really angry, and again, angry is also a healthy emotion. I remember my coach said to me, go scream into a pillow. And I found that one of the most useful tools in the world, because if I suppressed anger emotions, it would come out in a really damaging way to the person that I was with. Not physically, but I would say something or I would erupt, and that would make me appear to that person in a certain way. But as you said earlier, try to put yourself in other people's shoes as well. I just wanted to comment on that.
I think, part of the previous conversation we were having about women having to be more like men in the workplace.
Talking about men, see, look, Jamie's nodding.
There is that.
He says he's learnt a whole new vocabulary.
No, it's real. It's real. But also, I think these days, men are learning to be more like women. This conversation 10 years ago, even 10 years ago, would have been seen as just bullshit, just crap.
Yeah.
Whereas now, you can ask me if I cry, I can say yes, I did, in front of my friend without worrying about that. This is going out.
The reason why I asked you that as well is because, we've had conversations, because when I came on here the first time and stuff, I was using words like trauma and everything, and because Payman had never been exposed to this whole realm of stuff. And over time, he recognized that actually it's an understanding and doing work that I can use these words to understand who I am.
It's a vocabulary like any other, right?
Yeah. But the other thing is that thinking about it, even though we're talking about the archetypal figures within society, someone like Wim Hof comes across as a really masculine caveman to me, and he's made a whole movement out of breath work. Do you know what I mean? So in a way, he's broke that, because you suddenly have these typical 6-pack 6-foot men, whatever people want to define as being physically masculine, doing ice baths and breath work, which I think is remarkable. It's a huge movement,
Yeah, I really see it happening. I think there's an asterisk there as well from my side, which is any of these practices, ice baths, ultramarathons, Wim Hof breathwork, whatever it might be, are also very good ways to escape what you're feeling and more to numb from it and to avoid from it. That to me is going, intentionality is at the core here. If you engage in any of these practices as simply a means to escape what's going on inside your own head and to avoid the apparent discomfort or apparent boredom of sitting still and actually feeling what you're feeling, then that to me is actually not what we're aiming for.
No, I talk a lot about self-soothing, and it's another method of self-soothing. I find it interesting that addicts as well replace their addiction with intense exercise. It's just another addiction. It's another escape.
You can slow down your breathing by smoking.
Let's talk about smoking.
Or you can slow down your breathing by breathing, by doing that exercise.
Yeah.
Smoking and the breath. Does it affect your breath work practice is the question.
Oh, it absolutely
we know what it does in terms of the body, but it will affect your breathwork practice.
For sure. I remember I created for an app a few years ago a breathwork session to help with quitting smoking.
Amazing.
And it was essentially to try and replicate the breathing pattern that is done via smoking, because obviously there are substances within a cigarette that are creating this feeling and this addiction. But actually, there will also be the slowness of the breath that will definitely be playing a role within that. If we take out, let's say smoking was completely non-harmful, it would probably still create a level of relaxation through the time that you're taking for yourself and the speed at which you're breathing. That's not an advert for smoking, but it's, I guess, understanding the motion, understanding what's going on, but also understanding, and this is where we get deeper into, trauma and addiction, but also understanding what's led somebody there, and A, holding compassion for that, but B, supporting them through that and going, actually, what is a different and healthier outlet for this thing that is creating the habit.
Let's talk about ice baths, right? Because I've started doing this. Prav's obsessed. He spends 10 to 15 minutes in that ice bath.
0 degrees, man.
I'm literally 2 minutes and I cannot put my hands in. Yeah, I'm sitting there like that on the side. But anyway, what's the correlation with breath work and being in the ice bath? Does it enhance your breath work? Because I naturally feel I go into a different breath work as soon as I hit the water, just naturally but that's like an unconscious thing, if that makes sense. So talk to us a little bit about ice baths and breath work.
I have some strong opinions on ice baths. I use them. I advocate for them. I advocate for responsible use of ice baths. And I think there's a fuck ton of irresponsible use of ice baths, and to the point where people are going to start seeing a negative impact. In my opinion, I think we never hear about the stuff that's already going wrong, but I think we will hear panic attacks. If there's not proper medical contraindications, expose people, heart attacks in a very extreme case. Yeah.
Can I affect your fertility? Just question, for men and women, because I think someone said that for men it can actually affect fertility, sperm.
Cold is good for sperm count. I would say up to a point. And heat, sauna, for example, it's not good for sperm count. That's why the testicles are on the outside of the body rather than the inside, is because the cold is good. I don't know the direct kind of impact on sperm count and fertility, but cold good, heat bad.
Okay.
Do you must find yourself having to talk about all sorts of realms outside of breath work itself?
Yeah, I think
so. You're having to educate yourself on these.
Absolutely. I think I very much view breathwork as sort of the thing I teach and the thing I talk about. But actually, I work with a one-to-one client. I'm talking to them about their mindset, their past, their childhood. I'm talking to them about, mainly, we're talking through the lens of the nervous system. So I would view the work as really working with the nervous system, which is where ice baths start to come in, where other practices start to come in. The concept of rest, the concept of resilience, all of this stuff. It's sort of breath as a gateway into a much broader conversation around the nervous system and those practices.
But wait, I'm not done with the ice baths.
Sorry.
Yeah,
we'll come back to the ice baths. Yeah. So getting into the ice, or let's go use of ice baths first and then talk about the breath in relation to it. So ice baths are an acute stressor. Anyone who's got in one will obviously know that it's stressful. The view is that they can be used as a hormetic stressor, a positive stressor, to create positive adaptations in the nervous system, in the body. There are very well documented benefits of ice baths in terms of the release of cold shock proteins, in terms of nervous system resilience, in terms of energy, release of dopamine, all of the stuff that gets people hooked and bought into it. For me, I think the biggest benefits of ice baths come in the realm of psychological resilience.
Yeah, so agree with you.
I don't trust anyone who says, I love ice baths. What they really mean is, I love how ice baths make me feel, and I love that I feel mentally stronger as a result of getting into ice baths. The experience itself sucks. And
hate it, every minute of it.
But it's about how you relate to the conversation that goes on in your head around it, because Huberman talks about this, Hormozy talks about this, Chris Williamson talks about this. You are building a stack of evidence that you can win the conversation with the voice in your head, that you're building a stack of evidence that you can do something that ultimately your mind is telling you that you don't want to do. And that is powerful. That to me is pretty much my main motivator for using ice baths.
Me too.
And doing anything hard.
Is there a way you should breathe before getting in?
So this is where it gets interesting, because the Wim Hof method, let's talk more about Wim. The Wim Hof method is mainly based around hyperventilation breath work, and you'll see people doing it before they get into the ice. I get that as an experience, and I'm trying to be balanced here, that will psych you up for something like an ice bath. It'll get you going. It'll get you charged up, fired up, and go, I can do this.
Just quick in, out, in, out, in, out. Is that what you mean by hyperventilation?
Yes. So the Wim Hof breath would be, you're really stimulating yourself. I think that is the worst possible way you could breathe before an ice bath.
Before?
Yeah.
What about when you're in it?
And during, because actually, let's take us through a process of getting into an ice bath for a normal person. You step up towards the ice bath, anticipation, nerves, your breathing rate increases, your heart rate increases, you start to go into this fight-flight response. If you then hyperventilate, you're going to put gas on a fire. And so we want to breathe slowly. We want to regulate that nervous, anxious response so that you're more calm getting into it. So slow your breathing down, extend the exhale. Then when it comes to getting in, as you perfectly described, Rhona, we get this natural innate gasp reflex that happens for everybody when you get into the cold. It will try and steal your breath, shoot it up right into the upper chest and make you pant and gasp. So all we do, and this is how my protocol for ice baths, slow your breath down before. As you get ready to get in, take 3 big clearing breaths, like on your 4th breath, take a full inhale, hold at the top, and as you step in and lower down, exhale as slowly, as gently as you can. And then your goal is to stay with as slow a breath as you can in through the nose, out of the mouth for the first 30 to 60 seconds. The test for me of how well someone can regulate themselves in the face of stress is how well they can regulate their breath in an ice bath. So if you can regulate your breathing, you're able to regulate that shock response, that stress response. You're able to stay in for a little bit longer. And the more you can slow your breath down, the better an experience it's going to be. You see people getting in, they've hyperventilated before, they get in and they're hyperventilating while they're in there, and they come out and they might feel buzzed, they might feel alive and energized. Talk to me in 2 hours and they'll be knackered, they'll be drained, they'll be withered.
And what's your thoughts on like the different protocols of like then go from like that to a sauna or the other way around? Do you think is there evidence that there's benefits to doing it with a sauna, and which way round is better?
For sure. So sauna is another hormetic stressor, less acute, less direct than the ice, but I love the sauna.
Me too.
Arguably more than the ice.
I'm happy in the heat. I'm very happy in the heat.
So the heat is great. It's great heart health, number one for me from a sauna perspective. Mental clarity is just, I get all of my best ideas in the sauna, but heart health, increasing circulation through the heat. And it's just really, really well documented for cardiovascular health. In terms of use of ice and heat together, always the disclaimer around just safety. Blood pressure is changing a lot when you're in the ice and when you're in a sauna, going in opposite directions, and people can have quite negative experiences of significant drops in blood pressure if they're moving too quickly between the two, and sort of recklessly between the two. That being said, if I have an hour in our studio in Fulham downstairs, I will regularly do 15 minutes in the sauna, 1 to 2 minute break outside of the sauna, 90 seconds to 2 minutes in the ice, 2 or 3 times through, that kind of protocol, which is a really great just stress resilience, recovery protocol. I love it. It makes me feel great. But the key to this conversation of any use of sauna, but particularly ice baths, is helping people understand their own nervous system. So if you are someone, you're walking into a room with an ice bath and you've had a really anxious, really stressful day, think very carefully before you get into an ice bath, because you're going to put a huge amount of stress on your already stressed system. For some people, and this is where we need to learn to think for ourselves ultimately and take personal responsibility. For some people, that will take the edge off their anxiety, because that's just how their system works. But for the majority of us, I would say you need to be able to listen to your own nervous system and know how you're going to dose the thing that you're about to do accordingly. So I'll have days, I love an ice bath, I love the sauna. If I'm super wired, super stressed, even if I want to get into the ice, I won't get into the ice because I don't need that additional stress. And when I first discovered breath work, one of the first things I came to was the Wim Hof method. I was still struggling a lot with anxiety, and it made my anxiety worse. Now, it sounds a little bit like I'm just slating the Wim Hof method. It's helped so many people. It's a great protocol.
It's too stressful for me.
It's highly stressful, and it's always presented as a cure-all. if you've got anxiety, do this and it will work.
But like you said, when you're in a state of anxiety, my physiological state is so stumped and so paralyzed. The last thing I can do is like start doing things like that. I need something to create calm. The breathwork space has obviously been incredible, and I really want to know, what do you think the future of breathwork is? Because obviously, you know, you've also done some incredible things on like TikTok, Instagram, everything like that. You see more and people emerging in this space, but what do you see the future as a future?
I see a bright future, but I can come through with sort of not the bearer of bad news, but just with a slightly more, I hope, realistic lens for this work, which is, you could say this about a lot of fields and how they're presented on social media, but as people flood to breathwork, I think that's happening because it's very accessible and it is very powerful. And we're seeing that in the research and the anecdotal evidence is that it has, for myself, for thousands of people I've worked with, had a very positive impact. That being said, I will never, ever operate in the realm of absolutes. I will never say it works for everybody. I will never say it will always, you know, it will cure your anxiety. It will do this, it will do that, because that would be dishonest ultimately. I think it can play a very pivotal key role in the overall support of society in how we regulate our nervous systems, how we tap into rest, how we find more balance. The space itself is growing so quickly that we are due a reset. I think there's a bubble that will burst at some point. You're getting people misrepresenting things, running poor certifications, poor trainings that are, you know, I trained from a conscious connected breathwork, therapeutic breathwork perspective for 6 months part-time. And there are now trainings that you can do purely online that you get a certification after a day. It's a very unregulated space, a little bit like life coaching. There's a lot of people doing a lot of good, but there's also people looking to make a huge amount of money, as with anything in capitalism. So I think this, for me, for anybody listening, is not a case of don't buy the hype about breath work, because I think it is amazing. And I think there's so much good to be done, so much good that can be gained. But it's a buyer beware thing. It's, you know, look into the facilitator, the practitioner who you're going to be working with, look at their credentials, their certifications, and look to them as a person. I think the difference that I've seen, you know, 5 years ago getting into this space, there was such a small group of practitioners. I could have counted them on one hand, and everybody knew everybody. And it was all people who had either been in this space for a very long time, or who, similar to me, it had such a profound impact on personally that we felt compelled to share it. You're now getting people, and I see this across wellness as a whole, coming into this space because they think they're going to make money. And actually, in a service-led, purpose-led practice where you're supporting people, where it's therapeutic ultimately, that won't fly.
You know what, you say that, right, but I was really shocked because about 10 years ago I had a couple of yoga instructors as clients, and I always thought anybody that goes into yoga is surely a very like conscious human being with really great like morals and values, and actually I was totally shocked to find that wasn't the case. And I think I was naive to believe that when someone dedicates their life to practices that have been built out of healing, they're all like that. But as you said, like capitalism, now I have a really sour in my taste. I really don't like yoga. Like
you know what it is? There's a lot of fuckery.
Yeah, there is
around wellness.
But when you
nutrition,
say it won't fly, it will fly, because there's loads of
supplementation, right? I mean, there's a lot of bullshit out there.
And this is what makes me sad, is that we say buyer beware, but I think people can be easily led when they're looking for support.
Especially when they're vulnerable.
When they're vulnerable and looking for support, they will turn to someone who is saying the right things, and that is why I think the bubble will at some point burst, because I think, and there are things that are known in the breathwork world and that haven't quite gone because it's not quite big enough yet, of, you know, long-standing practitioners who have had cases brought against them for misconduct.
Really?
You know, there's not a huge amount, but I think there will be more, because people are vulnerable. People are being put into vulnerable states, altered states of consciousness. And I do think there will be, as with everything, because humanity has a shadow collectively and individually, there will be more that comes to the surface. Absolutely.
Yeah, but you know, the nature of social and algorithms, I mean, in our space, we've got a company who makes a teeth whitening product that doesn't whiten teeth, but they turn over $500 million a year.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The TikTok brand.
Yeah, and
The purple one.
yeah, that now. By the way, we shouldn't, as dentists, we measure the color of teeth, and we have to remember when someone's buying that and using that, it's not necessarily looking for what me and you are looking for. Yeah, because the execution's actually very good on those products, right? They taste good, they feel good, they click well. A lot of times when you use makeup or whatever, it's all of that.
You're buying into the brand.
Buying into all of that.
You're buying into the experience.
But what my point is, the truth doesn't always out.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that
100%.
as well. I think, I think it's going to be a very interesting time for the space. I tell you the biggest thing that I see at the moment, and it's each to their own, but particularly with these transformative kind of deeper modalities of breathwork, the experience can be very emotional, very cathartic, can be quite physical. I've had people in sessions before where if you were from the outside looking in, you'd be like, that person is having an exorcism. They're vibrating, they're shaking, they're releasing.
I've seen it in Jamie's classes.
That is part of it, but what we see on social media from accounts that have blown up as a result of this kind of content, because it's how social works, real up close and personal videos of experiences like that, and I call it catharsis porn, because it's just promoting this like arguably quite unrealistic expectation of what a breathwork experience will be, and it can be off-putting for people because they're like, I'm scared of that. It can set people's expectations too high because they're like, I need that. And this is where I know I sometimes shoot myself in the foot particularly from a social perspective, but from a marketing perspective more broadly, because I personally believe, and other people are entitled to their opinion, that we as practitioners have a duty of responsibility in 100%. How we talk about these things, how we promote these things, the language we use, the expectations we set, and really just holding yourself accountable I think a lot of these people believe their own hype, right? Yeah. And so they don't think they're lying. They don't think they're misrepresenting. But they get into a
state, it's like cognitive dissonance. They start really like believing the things that they say. And I genuinely think, and we talked already about, I was telling Payman about on another podcast about how I went to go see The Picture of Dorian Gray, and it was the best production I've ever seen. It was incredible. She got a standing ovation by the entire theatre. It was Sarah Snook that played 26 roles. But the point is, nothing's actually changed, and they were really clever because when she looked in the mirror, she turned into all the filters on Instagram and was like loving her own appearance as Dorian. And I was like, but that's it. Like, people there's this like self-congratulatory thing. And especially if a video goes viral on Instagram, you're like, I have to keep living this lie. There was a documentary.
Sometimes the genius is in the storytelling.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what I mean? Some people have that genius. Doesn't mean they necessarily know about breath.
Yeah.
But they know how to tell a story about breath.
Yeah. But I think it's that transparency, because even some of the most notorious podcasts that are out there at the moment are getting a lot of backlash. I'm not going to name any names, but they're getting backlash because also they are bringing on experts that are not actually good enough to like comment. So for example, recently a big podcaster got hate because he's getting scientists to comment on diet, and the nutritionists out there are like, no, but that's wrong, because the scientists would be like, I'm happy, you're better off drinking like a glass of full fat Coke instead of some orange juice from a sugar perspective. But the point is, the nutritionist like, but we're not just looking at sugar content and calorie, we're looking at like other things as well. So again, I've always said this to you, like nuanced thinking is becoming less and less, and polarizing content is becoming more and more, and that's creating more and more division. And we're not seeing it just on social media opinions, we're seeing it even in politics. How does someone like Trump rise to the top? Polarizing. Do you know what I mean? Brexit, polarizing. Do you see what I mean? And that's the problem, because it's the nuanced thinking that is going to divide us.
It's my least favorite thing about social media and arguably the world, because it is robbing people. People are allowing themselves to be robbed of personal responsibility. They want to be told what to think. So someone comes to me, will breath work cure my anxiety? I'll give you a full, balanced, nuanced answer that says it depends on the root cause, it depends on X, Y, Z factor.
And they don't want to know.
And they're like, oh, I just wanted to hear yes, please.
Yeah.
And it's the same, like the big podcast that I do name normally in these conversations, but
you know the one I'm talking about, yeah?
Oh, absolutely,
yeah.
Diary of a CEO. There was a breathwork episode with a guy called James Nestor, who has written arguably the pivotal book in the breathwork space, a fantastic book, has done so much for this space, and he's a fantastic writer and a fantastic advocate for this work. However, that podcast creates circumstances for people where they say things that, if you really, again, dig into the weeds, you go, I can see how he's got there, but there's so much more to it. And again, I think there's a duty of responsibility to say, to present a fuller picture. So his big one is, 99% of the population have dysfunctional breathing. I get what he means, but if we're talking about diagnosed dysfunctional breathing, it's closer to 35%. What he actually means is that the remaining 64% of those could be breathing better. We as a population could be breathing better. But to sit there outright and say 99% of the population have dysfunctional breathing, it creates fear in people.
The thing is, when you're an expert in anything, you can critique in a different way.
I mean, I got hate recently. He knows this.
Yeah, but it's just the nature of the thing. When you're an expert in something, then whatever, when you see someone else talking about that, you can pick holes in it because you're the expert in that thing. I'm quite interested in, look, it's obvious, just looking at you, it's obvious you're in a place of sort of authenticity, and you seem very comfortable in this space. What do your previous peers think of you now? Did some of them not understand, like someone going from a tech startup business to this?
It brings up interesting things for me, because I have learned a lesson in myself, arguably the hard way, over the last couple of years, which is that social media played a role in this, my work played a role in this. I lived as what I used to call breathwork Jamie, which was the persona that I was presenting on social, the version of me that showed up in my work, which is a real version of me, but it's not all of me. And actually, I still have friends from my last company that I worked at, I have my friends from university. We talk about it, but I would say actually there's a version of me, a part of me, that really values not being this version of me all the time. I'm able to, a bit like what you were saying in terms of the people we meet in London, the network we have. You've got to. It's not inauthentic. And I had a really long conversation with a amazing musician, very famous musician, about this the other day. It's not inauthentic to show up differently in different circumstances. You think you go home for Christmas, you see your family. That's a different version of you to the one that goes out on a night out with your friends. That's not inauthentic. That is different parts of you showing up at different times.
And parts work is so pivotal.
I love parts work.
Parts work helps you accept. So I did that a lot with Ella. Ella's my therapist that's come on here as well. So it's like we all have different parts of ourselves, and then you basically, when you work with a therapist, for example, you see those different parts of yourself, you observe those parts of yourself, and you actually don't judge parts of yourself, but in some sessions I was also the judge, and that makes you kind of more accepting to things, and it doesn't make you try to change so fundamentally who you are, because we're always... When I first met Jamie, for example, I was literally like, I have to put in the work because I have to be this thing. And, I met Jamie and Louis and all these people, and I was like, I need to be them. They're like the beacon of knowledge, and they're like living and breathing this like wellness thing. And I was like, but then I'm like this established dentist with this. And I was like, where am I? And then like parts work made me realize like there are different parts to myself. And look, don't get me wrong, I have often thought to myself, is the only way to find that true happiness to quit it all, sell my practice, move to Costa Rica, live with those jungle people in this beautiful retreat, do you know what I mean, and the hummingbirds. And then I realized that you don't have to. It's
awareness and acceptance. Like there's a big piece of this with this part stuff, because I remember I went for dinner with some friends of mine that I used to work with, and this was a couple of years ago, and I can have a very dark sense of humor, and I made this very dark joke a bit close to the line, and one of the guys who I've known for a really long time, he's a great guy, turns to me and goes, "That's not very on brand." And my heart sank, because that was of my own making, because I, in every aspect of my life, was trying to show up as breathwork Jamie. I was trying to be present and calm and balanced and namaste and a bit woo woo, and I have that side to me. I can draw a tarot card and really get into it. I can have a conversation at a plant medicine experience and really go into that with someone. And I can also go and watch a rugby match with my mate, drink a couple of beers, swear a bit, all of these aspects. It's not a great example, but that to me is authenticity, is an acknowledgement that I'm so multifaceted, and there's so many different parts to me that can show up in different ways when they're brought out of me by different people. I've always viewed myself as adaptable, but I don't even think it's that. It's just there's a self behind the identity. There is a pure awareness, present awareness of self that has values, that has an understanding of the world and how I operate, and an energy. And then there are the layers and the masks that get stacked up on top of that.
Yeah.
You know, I was the rugby player, I was the tech guy, I was the business founder, I was the breathwork guy, I was the healer, the therapist, all of these things. And all of those have been true at different points.
Yeah.
And it's actually in trying to reject those. And I was writing the other day about this notion of, if your personal development journey is contingent upon an old self that you are trying to run away from, then you will continue to suffer, just in a different form, because that is rejection of parts. I tried for a very long time to run away from any kind of entrepreneurial nature, any kind of businessman, any kind of drive, any kind of ambition, because I thought that hurt me previously. But that wasn't what was hurting me previously. And actually in the last year, and part of what I was saying at the top around my ambition for this business has come as a result of reintegrating and reaccepting those parts of myself that are driven, that are ambitious, that love big picture business, creative thinking, and being entrepreneurial. And how can I quite powerfully integrate that with the spiritual, with the emotional, with the vulnerable? And those two together, to me, that lights me up. When those two parts of me are aligned, when I'm in my vulnerability and my authenticity, and I'm also coming up with this huge idea of where I want to take this business, I feel my best, rather than thinking it has to be either or. Rather than, if I'm spiritual, I can't be ambitious, I can't want this, I can't like material things, all of that stuff. And that's different for everybody. And often the judgment that shows up in us is actually a judgment. It's our shadow. You know, if there's a part of me that triggers you, that's a part of yourself that you are pushing away and rejecting.
Yeah, and I get that a lot in dentistry. It's like, you can't be glamorous, fashionable and creative and then be the science person that's going to be like taken seriously.
Exactly.
That was a beautiful monologue, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. Look, he's so touched.
Thank you.
So, Jamie, I could literally sit and talk to you for like hours and hours. And I want to end on a note of, for those people, and we've talked about this before, for those people, especially dentistry with being such a stressful career, how can they integrate very simple breath work that's realistic into their daily routine, or even during, you know, their time in the dental practice? You know, there's time.
Mara was talking about, every time we've got this light that cures the filling material. It's like 20 seconds, and she was saying,
Did she breathe through it?
She was saying every time you push that button, breathe for that 20 seconds.
That.
And it's such a brilliant idea, because dentists are doing that
20 times a day.
20 times a day. So 20 times a day, regulating your breath.
Yeah, but
so
give us a tip.
I'd be really curious to see if you remember this, because I use you as an example all the time. Because it was a conversation I had with you when we were doing the one-to-one work, and you asked me a very similar question, like, how do I actually make this stick? Like, how does this come into my life? And I said, in the clinic, between every client,
you did
2-3 minutes, slow your breath down. Don't scroll, don't have a chat, stop, pause, and breathe. And that has now become, I always talk about my old client and friend, this dentist that I worked with. I presented her this example of basically breathing breaks and actually making use of the dead time. I was in a cab on the way here, stuck in traffic. I'd been busy. I was doing a few emails, and I was like, actually, no, I want to feel quite calm and present coming into this. I'm going to do 5 minutes of slow, steady breathing. So for me, that applies in every aspect of life, you know, in between meetings, in between calls, on the tube. This is so
pivotal,
beautifully accessible, and as a result pivotal, because you've got no excuse. You don't have to. It's great if you can, and if you do, sit down, carve out 10-15 minutes in the morning throughout the day, sit in your lotus pose and do your breath work. Fantastic. Really powerful practice, because you're cultivating that additional stillness and creating time for yourself. That it becomes infinitely easier if your nervous system's regulated. If your nervous system's dysregulated and you're in overdrive, carving out that time is going to feel impossible. So start small, build it up, compound. As you said, pushing that button so many times a day. If you breathe through every single one of those for 20 seconds, you're going to build up some compound interest.
Yeah.
And that to me is the power, because you're redirecting, you're taking yourself off autopilot.
Yeah.
And that to me is at the core of my business at the moment, is creating tools and techniques and experiences to take people off autopilot, because that is where things get tricky. That's where we burn out. That's where we face challenges.
Yeah.
And that's where we can come back to actually this vicious versus virtuous cycle of autonomy, self-actualization, creating your own reality, or living on autopilot, burning out, realizing too late that you've burnt out, resetting the dial, going again. So yeah, that would be the biggest one, I think, for people listening to this, is where in your day as it currently stands can you integrate this, rather than trying to change how your day is playing out. And funnily enough, if you can do that, you will change the way that your day plays out.
Yeah. I love that so much. You can find Jamie, as I said, the breath space on Instagram and TikTok. Is that your TikTok handle, or is it? No,
I'm so lazy with TikTok. I have to be honest.
I love his TikToks actually. But thank you so much. It's been so incredible, and as always, so inspiring. I've never seen Payman get emotional, so we know that we've done well here.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.